1951. 5 years before Monaco. Grace Kelly stood outside Stage 12 at MGM Studios, her script clutched in trembling hands. Inside, Gary Cooper and director Fred Zinnemann were waiting to test her for a role in High Noon. This wasn't just another audition. This was her chance at a real Hollywood career. Her chance to prove she was more than just a pretty face from Philadelphia. Her chance to become the actress she dreamed of being. If she failed this screen test, she might be sent back to doing commercials and minor television roles. She might never get another opportunity like this. Grace took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy soundstage door. The space was vast and dark, with a small area lit by hot, bright lights. Cameras stood ready. Crew members moved silently, preparing for the test. And there, in the center of it all, stood Gary Cooper. Tall, legendary, one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. He was going to act with her. Test her. Judge whether she was good enough to stand beside him on screen. Grace felt like she might be sick. "Miss Kelly." Fred Zinnemann approached her, his expression kind but assessing. "Thank you for coming. We're ready when you are." Grace nodded, unable to speak. Her throat felt tight, her hands sweaty despite the air conditioning. "Don't be nervous," Cooper said, walking over to her. His voice was gentle, reassuring. "We're just going to run through a scene. Have a conversation. Nothing to worry about." But there was everything to worry about. Grace had dreamed of this moment since she was a child. Being on a real Hollywood set. Working with real movie stars. Having a chance to create something that might last forever on film. What if she wasn't good enough? What if they saw through her to the scared girl underneath, the one who was terrified of being ordinary, of disappearing into a conventional life, of never mattering? "Let's start with the goodbye scene," Zinnemann said. "Grace, you're Amy, the Quaker bride who wants her husband to leave town instead of facing the gunfighters. Gary, you're Will Kane, the marshal who has to stay and fight. The conflict is clear, she's choosing principle over love, and it's breaking her heart." Grace read through the scene description again, feeling the character's pain. Amy was trapped between her beliefs and her love for her husband. She was making an impossible choice, one that would define the rest of her life. Grace understood that feeling intimately. "Whenever you're ready," Zinnemann called. The lights came up brighter. The camera rolled. Someone called speed. And then Grace looked at Gary Cooper, and everything else fell away. She wasn't Grace Kelly anymore. She was Amy Kane, a woman torn between love and conviction, forced to choose between her husband and her soul. The words came naturally, easily, as if they had always belonged to her. She felt Amy's anguish, her desperate hope that Will would choose her, would choose life, would give up his stubborn pride and leave town with her. But she also felt Amy's strength. Her refusal to compromise her beliefs, even for love. Her willingness to walk away from everything rather than betray who she was. "I'm leaving on the noon train," Grace said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I'm asking you to come with me." Cooper looked at her with such intensity that Grace forgot they were acting. For a moment, she believed they were really standing at that crossroads, really facing that impossible choice. "I can't," he said simply. And Grace felt Amy's heart break. The scene continued, each moment building on the last, the emotional stakes rising with every exchange. Grace poured everything into it, her fear of mediocrity, her longing for significance, her terror of being trapped in a life she didn't choose. When Zinnemann finally called cut, Grace stood blinking in the lights, disoriented, pulled roughly back into her own identity. The soundstage was silent. Grace felt panic rising. Had she done badly? Had she misread the scene? Had she ruined her one chance? Then Gary Cooper started clapping. "That," he said, looking at Zinnemann, "is our Amy." Zinnemann was nodding slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Miss Kelly, where have you been hiding? That was extraordinary." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Really?" "Really," Zinnemann confirmed. "You're exactly what this role needs. You're beautiful, yes, but you're also real. You made me believe every word. You made me care." Cooper walked over and shook her hand. "Welcome to the picture, Grace. I think we're going to do good work together." Grace couldn't speak. She could only nod, overwhelmed by the sudden realization that her dream was coming true. She had passed the test. She was going to be in a real Hollywood movie. She was going to be an actress. Over the following months, Grace threw herself into filming High Noon with an intensity that surprised even her. She studied her character obsessively, finding layers of meaning in every scene. She worked with Cooper, learning from his naturalistic style, his ability to convey volumes with the smallest gesture. And she fell in love with the work. Not the glamour or the fame or the attention, but the actual work of acting. The challenge of finding truth in fiction. The thrill of disappearing into another person's life. The profound satisfaction of creating something meaningful. This was what she had been born to do. On the last day of filming, Zinnemann pulled her aside. "Grace, you have something special. Real talent. Don't waste it. Choose your roles carefully. Work with directors who will challenge you. Don't let Hollywood turn you into just another pretty face." Grace promised she would. And she meant it. High Noon was released in July 1952 and became a massive success. Critics praised the film, and several mentioned Grace's performance specifically, noting her poise, her emotional depth, her ability to hold her own against Gary Cooper. Grace Kelly was suddenly in demand. Over the next 3 years, she worked constantly. Mogambo with Clark Gable. Dial M for Murder with Hitchcock. Rear Window, also with Hitchcock. The Country Girl, which won her an Oscar. To Catch a Thief, another Hitchcock film. High Society, her final role. Each film built on the last. Each performance deepened her craft. Each role proved that she was more than just beautiful. She was brilliant. And then, at the height of her success, she met a prince. Years later, sitting in her palace in Monaco, Grace would think about that screen test for High Noon. About the moment Gary Cooper had started clapping. About Zinnemann's words, "Don't waste it." She had wasted it. She had taken Zinnemann's advice for 5 glorious years, choosing carefully, working with the best directors, building a career that could have been legendary. And then she had walked away from it all. For what? A crown? A title? A life of endless performances with no director to call cut? Grace kept a copy of High Noon hidden in her private collection. Sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, she would watch it alone in the palace screening room. She would see herself as Amy Kane, young and passionate and so fully alive. She would remember what it felt like to disappear into a character, to speak words that weren't hers but felt more true than anything she said as Princess Grace. She would watch the goodbye scene, the one she had tested with, and feel Amy's anguish all over again. "I'm leaving on the noon train. I'm asking you to come with me." "I can't." Except in Grace's version of the story, she was both Amy and Will Kane. She was the one begging herself to choose differently. She was the one refusing to compromise. She was the woman who walked away. And she was the one left standing alone, watching everything she loved disappear. The screen test for High Noon had changed Grace's life. It had launched her career. It had proven she was a real actress, worthy of standing beside Hollywood legends. But it had also planted the seeds of her greatest regret. Because that screen test had shown Grace what she was capable of. It had revealed her true calling. It had given her 5 years of profound artistic fulfillment. And then life had asked her to choose between art and duty. Between Grace Kelly and Princess Grace. Between the noon train and staying to fight. Grace had made her choice. She had left on the noon train. And she had spent the next 26 years wondering what would have happened if she had stayed. If she had been brave enough to fight for the life she really wanted. If she had remembered Zinnemann's words, "Don't waste it." But she had wasted it. And no amount of crowns or palaces or perfect performances as Princess Grace could change that fact. Grace turned off the projector and sat in the darkness of the screening room, tears streaming down her face. On screen, Amy Kane walked away from Will, choosing her principles over love. In life, Grace Kelly had done the opposite. She had chosen love, or what she thought was love, over her art. And she had been paying for that choice ever since. The screen test that changed everything had been both blessing and curse. It had given Grace Kelly a career. And it had shown her exactly what she was giving up when she became Princess Grace. Sometimes Grace wished she had failed that screen test in 1951. If she had never gotten the role in High Noon, she never would have known what she was capable of. She never would have experienced the profound joy of real artistic work. She never would have had 5 glorious years to miss for the rest of her life. She would have remained ordinary, unremarkable, forgettable. But she wouldn't have known what she was missing. And that, Grace thought, might have been kinder. Because knowing what you're capable of and being forced to abandon it was a special kind of torture. One that Grace Kelly, buried deep inside Princess Grace, endured every single day. The screen test had changed everything. And Grace would never forgive herself for wasting what it had given her. Zinnemann had warned her. Cooper had believed in her. The camera had loved her. And she had thrown it all away. For a noon train that led nowhere she wanted to go. For a performance that would never end. For a role she could never escape. Grace Kelly had passed the screen test. But Princess Grace had failed the only test that truly mattered. The test of staying true to herself. And there were no retakes in real life. No chances to try the scene again. Just one long, continuous shot that lasted until death finally called cut. Grace stood and walked out of the screening room, leaving Amy Kane frozen on the screen behind her. Tomorrow, she would smile and wave and perform her duties as Princess Grace. But tonight, she mourned. For the actress who had passed the screen test. For the woman who had loved the work. For Grace Kelly, who had changed everything in 1951. And who had disappeared forever in 1956. The screen test had been the beginning. The wedding had been the end. And everything in between had been the brief, brilliant flash of a life lived with purpose. Gone now. Lost. Nothing left but memories and regrets and a copy of High Noon that Grace Kelly watched alone in the darkness. Remembering when she had been alive. Mourning the woman she used to be. The actress who had passed the test. And then failed to protect what she had won. Sometimes Grace wondered what Gary Cooper would think if he could see her now. He had died in 1961, just 5 years after she became Princess Grace. He never knew how deeply she would come to regret her choice. She remembered the wrap party for High Noon. Cooper had pulled her aside, his expression serious. "You're going to be a star, Grace. A real one. Don't let them change you. Stay true to the work." Grace had laughed, delighted by his confidence in her. "I will. I promise." "I mean it," Cooper had insisted. "Hollywood eats people alive. Especially beautiful women. They'll try to turn you into a commodity, a product to sell. Don't let them. Remember why you started acting in the first place." "Because I love it," Grace had said simply. "Then protect that love. Fight for it. Never let anyone take it away from you." Grace had promised. And she had kept that promise for 5 years. Until she met Rainier. Until the world offered her a fairy tale. Until she forgot Cooper's warning and let someone, herself, take away the thing she loved most. The irony was that Cooper had died thinking Grace Kelly was still acting, still creating, still fighting for her art. He had sent her a telegram after High Society was released, congratulating her on another beautiful performance. He never knew it would be her last. He never knew she would spend the rest of her life regretting that it was her last. Grace kept that telegram in her locked drawer, along with all her other forbidden artifacts. Sometimes she would take it out and read Cooper's words, "Brilliant work as always. Can't wait to see what you do next." Nothing, she would think. I did nothing next. I stopped. I quit. I walked away from everything you believed I could be. I'm sorry, Coop. I'm so sorry. The screen test for High Noon haunted Grace in ways that other memories didn't. Because that had been the moment of pure potential. The moment before everything went right, before the Oscar and the fame and the success. The moment when she was just a scared girl trying to prove herself. That girl had been so hungry, so determined, so absolutely certain that acting was her destiny. What had happened to her? When had Grace Kelly stopped fighting for what she loved? Grace knew the answer. It was April 19th, 1956. Her wedding day. The day she put on the dress and walked down the aisle and became someone else. The day Grace Kelly died. But the seeds had been planted earlier. In 1955, when she made her lists. When she weighed princess against actress and chose wrong. When she forgot Gary Cooper's words, protect that love. Fight for it. She hadn't fought. She had surrendered without a battle. And she had been paying for that surrender every day since. Grace returned to her quarters after watching High Noon, emotionally exhausted. Rainier was already asleep in his separate bedroom. The children were in the nursery. The palace was quiet, everyone dreaming their own dreams. Everyone except Grace. She stood at her window, looking out at Monaco sleeping below, and thought about Amy Kane walking to the noon train. In the film, Amy returns. She comes back to help her husband, to fight alongside him, to prove that love is stronger than principle. Grace had always thought that was the right ending. The romantic ending. The Hollywood ending. But now she wondered if Amy had made a mistake. Maybe Amy should have stayed on that train. Maybe she should have left Will to his stubborn pride and his guns and his duty. Maybe she should have chosen herself over love. Maybe Grace should have done the same. The screen test that changed everything had happened in 1951. But the real test, the one that would define the rest of her life, had come in 1955. And Grace had failed it. She had chosen duty over art. Safety over passion. The crown over the camera. And she would never get a chance to retake that test. Grace climbed into bed, knowing she wouldn't sleep. She would lie awake for hours, as she did most nights, thinking about the woman she used to be. The actress who had stood on stage 12 at MGM and poured her heart into a screen test. The woman who had promised Gary Cooper she would stay true to the work. The artist who had believed that acting was her destiny. That woman was gone. Buried beneath years of duty and protocol and royal performance. But on nights like this, when Grace watched High Noon alone in the darkness, that woman's ghost would whisper, "You passed the test. You proved you were extraordinary. You had everything ahead of you. Why did you throw it all away?" And Grace would have no answer. Except the truth. She had been afraid. Afraid of aging out of Hollywood. Afraid of being discarded. Afraid of ending up alone and forgotten. So she had chosen security over art. And discovered too late that security without purpose was just another form of prison. The screen test had changed everything. It had shown Grace what she was capable of. And losing that capability, choosing to lose it, had broken something inside her that would never heal. Grace Kelly had passed the screen test in 1951. But Princess Grace had been failing the test of living with that choice ever since. And there would be no applause at the end. No Gary Cooper declaring her extraordinary. No director saying she was exactly right. Just silence. And regret. And the ghost of a screen test that proved Grace Kelly could have been one of the greatest actresses of her generation. If only she had been brave enough to stay. If only she had remembered to fight. If only she had protected what she loved. But she hadn't. And now it was too late. The camera had stopped rolling long ago. And Grace Kelly was just a memory, flickering in black and white on a screen in a palace library, watched by a woman who barely recognized herself anymore. The screen test that changed everything. The beginning of a brilliant career. And the foundation of a lifetime of regret.